the more that the world is connected, the more of a cohesive world we live in.
This is The Payoff with me, Sylvia Jeffries, thanks to Airbnb. Susan, welcome to The Payoff. It's so great to have you in here.
Thank you. I'm super delighted to be here.
I'm so interested in your backstory as a fellow Queenslander. Although I grew up in the big smoke, the comparative big smoke of Brisbane, you grew up in a town called Morven, is that right? Where is Morven?
So started life in Morven. So that is basically a town of 160 people. We're actually on a farm outside of Morven. And it's about 8 hours inland from Brisbane. So if you just keep heading towards the centre of Australia, and if you found somewhere that's predominantly red dirt, you've pretty much nailed it.
You've found Morven.
You found it.
And growing up in a place like that, I know you eventually moved to Toowoomba, but throughout your childhood, what were your hopes or maybe expectations for your life beyond country Queensland?
I didn't have any. I think it's one of the things that when I meet with people who have really clear visions from when they're younger about they want to be a doctor or they want to be, in finance or they know what they want to be. What I saw was, mums who stayed at home and dads who predominantly were farmers or in agriculture. And so for me, I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mum, and I thought that was the best thing that there could be to do. And it was only as I started travelling that and in fact when I moved to Brisbane, that you just realise that the world is such a huge place and there are so many insane different jobs that you can do.
And that opening of your mind to the world has certainly played a big role or a big theme in your life, in your career so far. So you started out studying law, and while you were doing that, Virgin Blue launched here in Australia under Richard Branson, right? And your friend got a job there. You thought, I might have a go as well. How did that job come about for you?
That was one of those apply online, have it within 24 hours
type
of situations, which I remember going and telling my partner at the law firm that I would be leaving a quite prestigious law firm to go and work as cabin crew. And his response was a little bit of shock, but quite supportive. And for me, that was actually one of the jobs that when I was in high school, I just wanted to travel. And so for me, that just seemed like the most glamorous way of getting out and about. And some of the most formative friendships I have ever made have been from that job, and it remains one of the most fun jobs I think I've ever had in my life.
And this was just domestic travel at that stage,
It was,
is that right?
yes. Yeah.
So tell me about the day you decided to pitch in to Richard Branson. First of all, how did you get a meeting with him and what was the pitch?
So there wasn't a meeting. They tell you when he's in town when you're crew. So we knew that he would be in Sydney and I was Brisbane based. So I got myself to Sydney and he always stays in the crew hotel. So I just sat in the lobby of the crew hotel for 8 hours until he walked past and then launched myself. And to his credit, he listened, which was lovely. He didn't break stride. And
so you had to walk and talk?
Walk and talk, a true elevator, but like horizontal elevator pitch. And I had about 30 seconds between him and the taxi. And by the time we got the taxi, he said, I'm about to go and launch Virgin Mobile. Do you want to come on the cruise? And I was like, okay.
Sure.
And then he said, have the business case to me by 5 o'clock the next morning, which we actually didn't get off the boat until quite late, and this was pre-days of carrying a laptop with you. So some hotel stationery and frantically scribbling that out. And then the next day met with Brett Godfrey and Richard, who was, Brett was obviously the Virgin Blue CEO. And Richard said, this is the idea and she's going to run it.
So what was the idea? What were you pitching into him?
So the pitch was, because when I joined Virgin and it was so fast, I wanted to move to the UK. And so I thought I could get a free airfare, but I didn't clock a domestic airline doesn't travel
internationally.
And I had some other problems. I get motion sickness sitting backwards. So not great. When you're cabin crew and you have to sit backwards. Not ideal. And I don't really like tea or coffee, so having to serve them wasn't really my thing. But I worked out very quickly that Virgin had some issues in staff retention, training staff, effectively a really, really young workforce. On-time performance is critical for an airline and it's expensive to train. And so low tenure, no on-time performance. And so basically worked out a way that if I could link his UK airline with his Australian airline, and the UK airline was had been trying for 12 years to get a slot into the Sydney airport to bring Virgin Atlantic in. And so it was a really simple exchange program between the two airlines, which would take short-haul domestic staff and train them on long-haul full-service airline. And
so
then
like an incentive for those domestic staff.
Exactly. But you had to have then had a certain length of tenure, no sick or late performance on your file. So then you could really drive the performance, and was hugely, hugely successful. So ended up moving to the UK with Richard to manage that for a couple of years, which was great.
Wow. So the uptake was strong?
Uptake was amazing and fundamentally changed the performance of the business in terms of both on time and tenure and what it costs for cabin crew. And I got my free flight to the UK.
Yeah. So, you really had to work for it, didn't you?
I mean, I did. But to be fair, I got to take the first group of 20, and some of that 20 were my closest friends, remain some of my closest friends to this day. So if you're going to move overseas, you might as well.
It's a good way to do it.
Yeah, it was a pretty good
It
way.
fundamentally changed the path of your career as well, didn't it?
It really did.
How so? How would you describe that shift for you?
I joke because Richard is actually one of my references on my CV, and no one has ever called him. So now I've realised I can just put whoever I want on there, and no one is calling.
I might try that next time. Test the theory.
Barack Obama.
Yeah.
But it meant a couple of things. One, he taught me an awful lot, which was he really believes in the idea that ideas come from anyone, and he listens to anyone who he carries a notebook with him everywhere he goes, and he jots down these ideas. But also just moving to the UK and living in London for almost 5 years, it was such a world away from how I had grown up. And so it really just, again, just that exposure to culture and different opportunities just meant that when I came back, it was like, okay, I can look at any number of roles or anything to do, and know that actually if it doesn't work perfectly, you're still going to be okay.
And it did throw you into the path of the corporate world rather than going back to the law firm, where you started. After stints at Google and Groupon as well, you then were drawn back into the world of travel with Airbnb as the boss of the Australian and New Zealand arm of the massive global tech company. So what drew you to that role initially?
So they actually reached out to me through LinkedIn, and to be honest, I've always loved travel, and I know that's so cliche because every Australian says they love travel, but I loved working in tech and I loved working at Google, so it had never crossed my mind that there was a tech travel company. And the second that they reached out, it just became so obvious that this was, one, I'd used Airbnb as both a host and a guest, so I knew the product really well. Two, it was pre-IPO, which for me was really interesting in leading a team through that journey. And three, I get to go back into travel, and travel where all of the money that the host earns gets to stay with that host. And for me, I know when I had young children and a mortgage, the difference that the money I made when I'd go back to Queensland and visit my family and I'd rent out my place on Airbnb just made life so much easier. And I thought, what a great way to actually be able to go and lead that.
So when you were at Virgin Blue, you were able to identify some problems or areas for improvement or growth. Have you been able to bring that mindset to Airbnb in this role?
I've been really fortunate, actually. Obviously, none of these things you do alone, and they're always done with a team. But I look at Australia as such a great innovation hub. So there's a couple of things that I love that we've built out in Australia that we've scaled globally. And one is what we call our high-risk reservation queue. And this is basically, a couple of years ago, Airbnb was really struggling with party houses. And there's no point putting in noise detection because that tells you when a party is happening. You want to stop a party from ever getting to happen. And so I think because of my background in tech companies, I actually sat with the engineers and we built a AI model which uses thousands of signals to work out in literally 0.001 of a second whether Sylvia is going to have a party. Wow. And when you hit book now, it immediately says, we're not going to allow you to book this property. We think you're going to have a party. Go here to our hotels platform to book a hotel. Oh, wow. And that was incredibly successful. Needed to not hit conversion, but also needed to make sure we could stop parties from happening. And that's now scaled globally as our party protection system, which, things like that.
The fun police.
The fun police. But I liken it to, I look at, everyone can always have a good time, but there's a level where, you're disturbing the neighbourhood and you're not respecting someone's property.
You're not respecting someone's property.
100%. And I think because I'd been a host, you want to make sure that you're only letting people into someone's home. And most of our hosts, it's their primary place of residence. So you want them to know that whoever is there is going to be respectful of both them, but the community as well that property is sitting within.
So is that the case that the majority of Airbnb hosts are letting out their primary residence on
So
Airbnb?
about 80% of our hosts, it's either their family holiday home or it's their own personal home that they rent out when they go away on things like holidays or on work trips. So that's why for us it's so important to make sure that, and Aussies are mostly respectful, but you just got to make sure you weed out those who
You don't want to
perhaps
trash someone's family home.
100%, yeah.
You've had to navigate a lot over recent years, including the pandemic, which must have been a time of great upheaval in the travel industry. But also there are a lot of regulatory changes happening in this space. We see protests in Barcelona, of course, overseas about the number of visitors who are in the city. In Byron Bay, there have been changes to what do we call it, a per night cap, how many nights a year you're able to rent out your Airbnb, for example. How have you navigated those regulatory changes over your time at Airbnb?
I think it's a really critical one. The housing crisis is real. It is absolutely impacting a huge, huge number of people. And I think for me, I've always been a believer in long-term relationships. So I spend a lot of time meeting with local mayors, meeting with politicians to help them to understand the fact that there is a perception that so many of our properties are investment properties and they're off the long-term rental market. And in actual fact, when you sit down with them and explain that really isn't the case. We also have a product we built called City Portal where we give local governments, local councils, our data on the area so they can see how many Airbnbs they are, that they're only rented out perhaps for 2 or 3 weeks a year, just to help them to understand, because I'm a big believer in when people have data and they have the facts, they can make the best decision. But I also appreciate that there is this housing crisis and everyone is desperately trying to pull every lever at their availability to solve that. And so I do empathise with politicians who are trying to fix what has been a decades-long problem in the making. But I think what I'm really proud of at Airbnb is the fact that over 73% of our hosts need the money they make from hosting to stay in their own home or to offset the rising cost of living. We've recently released a product called Co-Host. So instead of you having to do the work, there's actually someone in your neighbourhood who's a really highly rated host who can do everything for you. You literally give them the keys and you go away for your week's holiday. So we call it the side hustle without the hassle because it's the only thing you can go on a holiday and make money while you're away. So I think that has given a lot more opportunity for people to do it, but also really, really clever, Aussies who, whether it's your first home and you know that there's a major sporting event in town, and so you actually ship in with mum and dad for the week. And, we had a great example at Wollongong in the World Cycling Championships where if you rented out your house for 1 week there, it was equivalent of 6 weeks of the average Aussie income.
Wow.
And so people have also been able to go, actually, you know what, I can either get away and go on a holiday, or I can go and crash with a friend, or I can, go back to mum and dad's and actually really make a dent in my mortgage and just give myself a bit of breathing room. And that's what I love about it, is it doesn't matter if you have an amazing house in Bondi on the beach or whether you've got, something in Morven, there is someone who wants to rent your property and there's a space for you on the platform.
So sporting events, this is an area that you're looking to for growth at the moment. You've been doing some research into this area and our habits as Aussies, which probably surprises not many people, around how much we travel around sporting events.
I mean, we know Aussies love sport. I just didn't know how much we really loved sport. One of the stats that blew me away was between now and the end of the year, 60% of adult Aussies are planning to travel for a sporting event, which is insane. And it's one of the last things they'll cut in terms of discretionary spend.
Wow.
And I think it's partly because you're normally going with friends, you're watching as a group. It's such a social activity and you just can't go past live sport. Whatever code of football you follow, whatever sport you follow, live sport is it is really hard to beat.
Have you got any data or research around which events generate the most tourism money in this country?
It depends on a couple of things. So, for example, the Lions and Wallabies are on at the moment, because that's not here all of the time. That is hugely popular. Gen Z are super keen on attending that, so they're flocking to those. And then you have the diehards who will follow that tournament to every single game that goes to, which is pretty amazing. And then we have things like surfing. And so, people who are doing all of the surf lifesaving competitions and all of the Ironmans. And so, again, they will travel for so many of those events to follow, their heroes, or perhaps they're, novice in that sport themselves. But it always blows my mind just about how they're doing it.
What about the rise of run clubs? Because people are travelling here, there and everywhere for marathons and half marathons, and the City to Surf in Sydney. Like these
100%.
These are big events on any runner's calendar.
They are huge. I was at Gold Coast recently when the Gold Coast Marathon is on, and you're talking 30,000 people just doing the half marathon.
I mean, Broadbeach would go off shortly.
It's insane
at that time.
That's another one where you want to stay as close as possible to the finish line.
Sure.
So when you finish, you
don't have to limp all
that
the
in
way
City
home.
to Surf. It's hard to get home when you've done that, and that wasn't even a full marathon. But yes, the run clubs and just the general health and wellness trend that we're seeing across all generations. People are loving travelling. I think Sydney Marathon as well. Now that's become one of the majors. They're events that are so much fun to actually be a part of, regardless of your fitness level, that it's kind of hard not to get swept up in the enthusiasm.
So with all this data that you have at your fingertips now around our behaviour with big sporting events and travel, what can you do with that as a company? How do you target customers to perhaps give them a better experience maybe for an event like that?
So there's a couple of different ways. On the guest side, it's about how can you suggest places for them to stay that perhaps is not the CBD if they're travelling from interstate and that may be their first port of call. But also for hosts, it's about if this isn't your sport or your thing, why don't you get out of town and make some money? So, for example, when the cricket was on in January in Sydney, on average, a host was making just under $1,500 for the weekend for getting out of town, which then means you can put that money into travelling to whatever marathon you want to head to, or whatever sport is your choice. But also, I think we're moving into services and experiences. And so if you want to have a private chef around to your Airbnb to cook up a team dinner before you head to the event.
A carb load dinner.
Great.
Yep.
Carb loading for the marathon, that would be a great one. You can do that.
Wow.
If you want to book the masseuse for the day after the marathon in your Airbnb, you can do that. And so just kind of wrapping end-to-end services around what people can do. So it's more of a full experience than just the stay.
How has the uptake been with this expansion into experiences on Airbnb?
The enthusiasm is very strong.
Yeah.
We literally have only released it recently. So we released it in May. So this is a very hot off the press, but it has been one that everyone is super, super keen on. And I think as well because it's great in terms of it's just one less thing that you have to think about or try to arrange because you can see it in your Airbnb app. So you can see your stay, you can see your booking for your masseuse, you can see your chef, you can pick the menu. It's all just enclosed in one ecosystem, which just makes it so easy for, show up and then just be able to relax and enjoy.
And do all the work. You mentioned Gen Z before being particularly enthusiastic about the British Lions tour, British Irish Lions tour. We know that Gen Z are all about sharing their experience, and they're also inspired by what they see online, perhaps on social media as well. How does that factor into what you do at Airbnb?
So I couldn't agree more. They definitely are. And they also want to be doing things that no one else is doing. It's why we've done a lot this year on regional tourism. So we know people want to discover things and they want to try and experience new things, but they need to feel comfortable about doing that and have a reason to go. So at the start of this year, we did a wine tourism guide, which is around where are the wineries that are the lesser known wine regions. And so just giving people these beautiful, amazing places to actually head out and visit. And the fact that you can, do that with a group of mates, you can all share an Airbnb, you can be in the kitchen cooking up a storm together, you can make it really affordable to just jump in the car and have a weekend away at these amazing Aussie events or, towns that are really small but have extraordinary art galleries or have really incredible natural beauty, but you just may not have heard of them. So making things discoverable for people is something that we're really focused on.
And then making sure it's Instagrammable or TikTokable.
Do you know what? I've learned that they're all very good at making their stays.
They'll figure that out. Yeah.
But actually our hosts have worked that out as well.
Yeah.
And so our hosts are now, they know that if you have an outdoor bathtub with a really scenic view, that is going to go incredibly well on things like TikTok or Instagram.
And the gift basket. I've stayed in a couple of Airbnbs where they've left a beautiful gift basket.
Always works really well. But it's those little touches touches that make the content. And so I think that is something that our hosts are also really, on top of the normal hospitality they're doing, they're thinking about, how do I make my listing stand out? How do I make my home somewhere really appealing for people to come and stay at?
Clearly free snacks are the way to my heart.
Free snacks, that's the win for me as well. Okay. Just leave chocolate, I'm fine.
I'll take it. As we know, obviously, especially in the business world, every challenge can come with an opportunity as well. The pandemic obviously was an enormous challenge for you as a travel business. But was there an opportunity that came with that for you as well? Did you identify something that could help your hosts but also help your customers on the other end?
There really was. I think as the pandemic stretched on, as did the lockdowns, people were in desperate need of getting out of their own home. And I think where Airbnb happened to be the perfect product market fit was you could hop in your car and you could drive 3 hours and you could be somewhere incredible and you could have space and you could be in the great outdoors and you could just not be sitting in front of a computer looking at a Zoom screen. And so, we really pivoted into domestic travel and that 3-hour drive time. Our data was telling us people were searching for 3 hours, but also if people were searching for a really well-known destination spot, how could we show them other locations that were close by? But also things like we have one of the highest pet ownership per capita in the world. And what we noticed when we were scraping all of the messaging that happens on Airbnb is that everyone was asking, can I bring my pet? Can I bring my pet? Can I bring my pet? And so the global team were very quickly able to build out a pet-friendly filter. So you could search for properties that were pet-friendly. And we did a lot of host education around what does it look like to be pet friendly? Do you have an enclosed yard? Do you have a water bowl for pets? Somewhere for them to sleep, that kind of thing. And also, what pets will you accept? Because there is a difference between a cavoodle and a Bernese mountain dog,
German Shepherd.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was our most searched filter, literally as soon as it was launched.
Wow.
Because people were wanting to get away, but they needed to take their pet with them.
So was Australia first to implement
that? Launched globally, but Australia certainly were one of the biggest uptakers of that. But it just meant people could take a holiday and that they didn't. Boarding is expensive for pets as well. But also, if you just wanted to get away during COVID, it was one less thing that you had to think about, which was particularly with some of those restrictions of could you get to a kennel to actually drop off a pet anyway. So
I don't have a pet, but during the pandemic I had a baby and I remember when Oscar would have been about 6 months old and I was just desperate to see my family who were all in Queensland. And remember the border bubble? Yes. We were allowed to travel into this one little bubble in the Northern Rivers region, like Tweed down to, I don't know, Pottsville, which is where we went. So I booked an Airbnb in Pottsville and we were all able to stay there. And none of it makes sense now when you say it out loud. But I was able to stay in this house with my brother and sister-in-law and their kids, and my sister came and my mum, and we had this beautiful time together. And it makes me reflect now on how busy that period must have been for hosts in that region.
It really was, but it was actually all of our hosts were incredibly busy because there was no international travel as an option. And I remember when some of the restrictions lifted and in terms of the interstate travel, and everyone was just desperate to get anywhere that was not their own state. And it was so fascinating about how people wanted to get out. But they just wanted wide open spaces, they wanted space to themselves, and they wanted to reconnect with friends and family. And I actually think it was such a great moment to be at Airbnb because you realised we're all about connection and we're all about anyone belonging anywhere. And just to be able to see those connections happen and people to be able to... I didn't see my family for over 12 months, and I remember in Queensland as well, and I remember my daughter was maybe 2 or 3, and then the next time that my parents saw her, she was a year older, which meant she'd completely changed as a human.
Totally.
And you just realise how important those connections are when they're taken away from you. And I think, the beauty of Airbnb that you can rent out your place when you travel so you can afford to go and see friends and family. And everyone needs a break, particularly we're all working harder than ever. More of us are doing side hustles than ever before. To be able to have that opportunity, I think, is something that's pretty special.
So you mentioned earlier the expansion into experiences. So Airbnb in a way is becoming more of a travel concierge in one sense. What are the other opportunities for growth within Airbnb? I know you probably can't give away anything that's in the works, but are there some areas that are of interest to you that you could possibly explore?
I think, Brian, who is our co-founder and CEO, has talked about he wants to be the Amazon of travel. I'm not yet entirely sure I know exactly what his plans are entirely. But we do know with services and with experience, it's about how can you give people... I think there are enough billionaires covering rockets at the moment. But it's about how can you make that connection possibility for people. How can you make it easier for people to travel, and how can you make it easier for people to host? And the more that the world is connected, I just think the more of a cohesive world we live in. So anything that we can do to encourage people to get outside their comfort zone, to travel to places that they may not have normally considered. And in fact, we got an email recently about there's some digital nomads, the senior nomads, and they have been living off Airbnb for the last, I think it's over a decade, maybe 12 years. Basically, they've sold up everything and have just travelled the world. And they recently released a piece about their 12 learnings, and it was so fascinating about experiences being more valuable than possessions. And it was just such a nice reminder of how adventurous people can be and what Airbnb can actually enable people to do.
How many years are you into this role now?
Almost 6 years.
And I get the feeling you're still very excited by it.
I think it's one of the... I've worked at some incredible companies, so I'm very, very lucky. But this one in particular, I think... the letters that I get from, and particularly because I'm from a farming background, but the letters I get from farmers saying, if we hadn't converted our machinery shed, we wouldn't have been able to afford to put food on the table this year. I got a handwritten letter, which was beautiful, from Maureen, who lives in North Sydney. And she said her husband had passed away and she wasn't able to afford to stay in her home. And she started renting out her spare room and now she could stay in her home. But what I loved was she said, I can no longer go and see the world, but now the world comes to see me. And when there's a loneliness epidemic and there are people who are struggling financially, the ability for those things to make a real difference in individuals' lives. So that for me is the piece where I love travel, and name anyone who doesn't love a holiday. Yeah. But I love the impact that it has on both guests and hosts of being able to live the life that they want to lead.
Having met you before at events, I'm acutely aware of how passionate you are about fostering other women in business and leadership as well. So as a female leader in the tech industry, how do you purposefully encourage and nurture other women in the industry?
So I think a lot of it is actually just giving women confidence that they can do something. And I think I'm a relatively good example of that. I think when I started in the workforce, I hadn't completed an undergrad degree. I dropped out. I finished my MBA when I was in my early 30s, and I thought I'd missed the wagon by that point. But you have to go into roles that stretch you and test you. And I think the thing for me that I've always tried to live by is you don't make the decision about whether or not you can do that role. Your only job is to put your hand up and say you're interested, and someone else will make the decision if they think you can or not. And if that decision doesn't fall your way, that person still knows that you're ambitious and that you still have hopes to do that. And if it does, how great that you can go and learn and there's this new skill and you'll have a support system that will help you do that. I also try and spend quite a bit of time actually coaching women through their journeys. And I've been really fortunate. There's been people who, when I worked at AMP, which was a long time ago, that I'm still in touch with, and I've been able to see people go from literally a coordinator role working with me and one who didn't believe she could do sales, and I put her into a mat leave role and said, well, listen, if it doesn't work out, then in 9 months' time you can go back to the role you were doing. She's now the national manager. And so to be able to see people progress through that. And I remember, in fact, when that role came up, she called me and said, I don't think I would get it. And I gave her the exact same advice. And she is an absolute gun and sits in that role. So for me, nothing makes me happier than seeing people who have got to positions that they themselves didn't think they could get to.
What about managing your own workload? Because in your position, working for a global tech company, I imagine you are operating in various time zones, 7 days a week. So how are you you're a mum, by the way, of 2. How do you manage that and stay sane and well?
Firstly, I do a job that I love. That makes a huge difference.
Helps,
and I have an incredible team. And so I think that definitely helps. I had a live-in nanny for 4 or 5 years. I couldn't have done that couldn't have managed without that help. But I also think I do take time out for myself, and I'm pretty particular on times in the evening when my children are at home and before their bedtime are just no-go zones. So I'm happy to hop on calls after they've gone to bed, and as you said, global company, that will always happen. But I'm really clear that when they're home from school and when I'm home from work and it's dinner time, that's devices down, and that's solely with them. So we always have dinner together, and that's just kind of always been what we've done. So I think that plays a big role into it. And then jogging for me is the thing. People walk past me. I'm not jogging.
Me too.
At
Yeah.
speed. But I get to play really awful country music or music from a very long time ago.
Oh, those country roots are still there.
Love at volumes that are not appropriate or good for my hearing, and I can just plod around, and it just means it's almost a meditation where I don't think, I'm just out and enjoying whatever view that is, and you can do that in any country in the world. So that for me is the way that I can just zone out.
So you'll have to come to my run club. My run club is predominantly mothers.
Amazing.
Because you can get away with securing a little bit of time to yourself if it's for the
Exercise.
purpose of exercise. And it's the meditation
100%.
of that repetition and the endorphins and all the runner's high, all of it, even though, again,
Could I
I'm
play
very
my John
slow.
Farnham at volume?
You are allowed. We are a very
Quite.
safe space when it comes to
Right.
music choices and tastes. I promise you that.
I could test that.
No, everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome.
But that's exactly it, and great to do it in a social setting as well.
For sure.
I haven't quite got to run club yet, because on the occasion that I'm down at Bondi and I see those ones going past,
Yeah.
I think,
Oh, no, ours doesn't
Not
look
today.
like that. Don't worry. No. Ours doesn't look like the one where people are trying to hook up and find a date for Saturday night.
I just need one that doesn't look like they're very good at running.
Yeah,
to be
that's
honest.
me. You stick with me. You stick with me. You'll be fine. So what about you and travel? What's the best? I mean, you would know better than anyone. What's the best Airbnb you've ever stayed in?
I mean, it's a tricky one because I've just had so many
Spoilt for
extraordinary
choice.
experiences. There's one in Dalesford, which is called Sweet Republic, that the team from Sugar Republic have built this house, and it's got a ball pit in the bedroom, and it has an iced Vovo room. And my daughters, and it has a KBS stairway, and my daughters think it is the best place, and they beg me to take them back there all the time. Then there's ones where you open the door, and there was one in Oya in Santorini, and it was a white cave house. And it was that classic example of you get there and it was just 1,000 times. It looked great in the pictures and was just 1,000 times better when we got there. And you're just blown away by the location and the view and the space and things like that. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky that we've got a few. And then there's a great one called Milkwood Barn down the south coast that I've done a few girls' trips to, and it's just they've done a beautiful job on this barn, and it's just out in nature and amazing. But we're about we have our annual host awards, so keep an eye out for that, because that's basically
that's a
your
good way
wish
to
list.
find. Okay, the winners.
I'm lucky because I get a sneak peek at those before they go public.
Right.
So
All right. I've got a sisters weekend coming up in November, so I'm going to keep an eye out to
that,
see what I can
that is
find.
it. Yeah.
Okay, well, before I let you go, I was going to ask, what would you say to 10-year-old Susan growing up in Morven, now that, with the benefit of hindsight and some of your career behind you? But I'm probably more interested in this stage in what you would say to your daughters who are entering this generation where things are changing and opportunities are different, and there are actually a lot more hurdles in front of young people trying to get ahead and set off on their careers at the moment. What would you say to them? What is the biggest lesson from your career so far that you would impart on them?
I think not being fixated on being any one thing. I remember when I was at school feeling awful because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and everyone was really clear that they had this one job that they were going to do and that was their career, and feeling very lost for years about not really having a title or a job that was going to be my thing. And so when I look at, the average person now who's leaving school will have 7 different careers. And I've worked across so many different industries, all of which I really learnt a lot from and enjoyed. And so for me, I would just be encouraging my children to try as many different things as they can. And even things that may appear as a hobby today that then means you're the next TikTok star of the generation. And so for me, I'm always getting my kids to learn new things, and I try and do that myself. So this year I'm learning ballroom dancing, which my poor instructor, I'm really, I am testing his patience. I did arm knitting. I've arm knitted a scarf recently, which, but
wait,
just
what's arm knitting?
Oh, so you knit with your arms, and then it's basically giant merino wool, and then you make it's very Lenny Kravitz.
Oh,
but I love
with
it.
leather, yeah.
And so for me, it's just always learn new things. You never know, something that may not have been anything today than in 5 years' time. I look back at my career and the number of opportunities that have come my way because of different things that have stacked together that maybe is hard to find in that combination. And not because there was any great plan, but just because I was prepared to try different things. So for me, it's just for the kids, do as many random, unique, different things as you want to do. And you'll find something you love. And if not, you will have learnt something from every single one of those things.
Mix it up. Susan, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.